All right, what's up, y'all? We're back on Facebook Live. Wes Mitchell here, Chris Clark. Doing it a little bit different, a little Saturday Gamecocks chat. We'll give everybody a second to get in and hopefully join us. You're probably sitting at home anyway right now watching the draft, so hang out with us a little bit, and we'll talk some Gamecock ball. Chris, real quick, we're going to dive into the individual picks here in a second. Latest news, DJ Wanham just got picked literally, 10 minutes ago by the Vikings. So congrats to DJ. But so far, 3 Gamecocks picked, one on day one on day two, and now one today as well. What would have been your big picture thoughts just on the draft in general and the Gamecocks getting drafted so far, man?
Well, I think, probably the number one storyline for everybody was, how high is Javon Kinlaw going to go? And I think most people had him pegged in that top 15 range, and that's exactly what ended up happening with him going to San Fran. I think he was generally thought of as one of the top 2 tackles. Was he the top guy? Was he the second guy? Probably depended on which team you asked and when each team was picking. The Panthers had an opportunity to go and grab somebody with a defensive pick. They're expected to go defense. Really, the folks that you saw sort of circled for them were Derek Brown from Auburn at defensive tackle, Kinlaw at defensive tackle from South Carolina, and also Isaiah Simmons from Clemson was another guy that it was thought that they may take a look at him. So they went ahead and got Brown, and that left Kinlaw for the Niners. And who knows, maybe if the Niners were picking higher, they might have taken Kinlaw anyway. But great story for Kinlaw, amazing example of development. So happy for him. And then, the rest of the guys, I think based on the next couple, picks that we've seen from South Carolina, really they've been about right where we thought. Brian Edwards, it was thought of that his ceiling was probably second round. If he went second round, it wouldn't be super early. And I think, Wes, he ended up being the 15th or 16th receiver taken. I think I just did a quick count a little while ago. I think he had 15 guys taken ahead of him. So still a really solid draft slot for him. He goes to the Raiders, gets himself in a good situation. Lynn Bowden from Kentucky taken right before him. And, Wes, after round 1 wrapped up the other night, I got a text from somebody with some NFL connections who told me that, probably look out for Edwards to go somewhere between that 50 to 90 range. So that would have been, back half of the second round onwards, and that he'd be a day 2 pick, and ended up going, I think, 81st overall. So about what we expected. And then DJ Wanham was thought of as a mid-round type of pick, probably a earlier day 3 guy, and the Vikings just snatched him up, as you said. So be curious to see, other slots for guys. There's some potential for some later round picks for some guys later today. If not, definitely some priority undrafted free agent contracts coming out for some other guys as well.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go a little bit reverse order just because if you're watching this live right now, thanks for joining us on Facebook, or, if you're watching on YouTube later on after we've posted this. In real time here, DJ Wanham has just gotten picked by the Vikings. And, I think with Kinlaw, you sort of, the Niners know what they're getting with him. You're drafting him in the first round. And I think to an even lesser extent, I think with Brian Edwards, you sort of know what you're getting there. To me, the guy of the South Carolina picks, the one that is probably like maybe the sleeper. I'm not going to say the sleeper of the entire draft. That's hyperbole because I don't follow the draft enough to know as far as the other, guys involved. There's so many guys involved. It's a full-time job just to follow the draft itself. But I feel very comfortable saying that DJ Wanham is the type of guy who is not that highly known, outside of South Carolina circles, but will probably find a way to stick in the league, if healthy, for a long time. Everybody that talks about DJ Wanham I remember sitting there in the old media room at Williams-Brice Stadium and listening to Lance Thompson talk about DJ Wanham, after some of his first practices on campus, and talking about, hey, this guy is a professional already. The way he carries himself, he's a first guy in the door, last guy to leave type, leads by example. is never going to give you any trouble off the field. If you're gonna select a mid-round guy that's going to sort of, you hope, make your 53 roster spots and be someone that can help on special teams, be someone that can fill in as a starter, be a reserve maybe early on in his career. To me, you want these professional types, these guys that you always know what you're going to get. There's not going to be inconsistency. I think he proved at the combine he has the athleticism, probably underrated athleticism, honestly. He has the athleticism to play at the NFL level. We know he's one of those guys who was always in the right place at the right time on Carolina's defense. If he's healthy, I personally think DJ Wanham is going to be a really, really solid NFL player and one of those guys that just finds a way to stick in the league for a long time.
Yeah, and maybe not. He might not have the star type potential of a Kinlaw, right? Now, could he develop into a starter? Maybe so. Obviously it's difficult. You're talking about in the NFL, you're talking about making a 53-man roster. You're talking about, trying to stay healthy. You're trying to talk about getting playing time on that 53-man roster, whether it's on special teams, taking some snaps on defense or both. And then obviously to break into the starting rotation, you're the best of the best. And so, obviously you got a better chance when a team invests an earlier round draft pick on you to stick around. And I think you don't have to worry about anything. And you already hit on this, so I won't reiterate it that much, but you don't have to worry about anything from, work ethic standpoint with DJ. From a technical standpoint, that's something we always talked about when he played at Carolina, was just how technically sound he was. He knew exactly what to do, where to be. Underrated athleticism, as you said, Wes, and someone that I think is going to have a chance to be versatile and do a lot of things for a team. So I think, you look at these first three selections, I think they can all help the respective teams that drafted them. And, a really good, you look at this is some returns from Will Muschamp's first class. I mean, Kinlaw ended up being a 2017 guy because he had to go to junior college, but Muschamp started recruiting him into 16 class. So you get Edwards and you get Wanham, who was a 2-star guy that was committed to Indiana, thought it ranked as a tight end prospect at one point. Kinlaw, Brian Edwards, who was a little more of a regional, if not, fringe national recruit, 4-star guy, but some really good gets and guys that really developed when they got on campus.
No doubt. All right, so let's get our Facebook folks involved. I see a lot of you on here, but y'all aren't really commenting a whole lot yet. So we do have a couple of comments. What's up, Ronnie? What's up, Savannah? Seen that name before. I think we got a couple of our common listeners. So where's everybody joining us from? What's everybody doing today? And please share this video as well, because the more people we get on here, the more of these that we're going to do and the more that it makes sense for us. But I think let's go back to Kinlaw. First of all, like you said earlier, outstanding story, and just you can't help but be happy for Javon Kinlaw that he got drafted and is going to be able to take care of himself, take care of his family, take care of his daughter, who, if you go watch the videos of him when he got drafted, the stuff Gamecock football put out on Twitter has been outstanding, giving you a little behind the scenes look at what's going on when these guys get drafted. So that was amazing. Just a story that I think a lot of people, myself included, who knows how the average person would respond to being in the situation that Javon Kinlaw was in. Homeless at one time, didn't really have a lot of support at various times in his life, but had an opportunity. He goes to Jones Junior College. He takes care of business there. He gets to South Carolina, goes completely all in as far as the nutrition aspect, getting his body in the right spot to be a draft guy, and then performs on the field and did it with a great personality and a smile on his face the entire way. So you can't help but be happy for this guy. But man, I'm looking the more, and I'm not an NFL expert by any means, but the older I get, it seems like if you're going to succeed in the NFL, it's just as much about going to the right place as it is about your own ability. And I think for Kinlaw, that was a Niners team that won this past year, obviously made it to the Super Bowl, by running the football on offense and by playing great defense, particularly having a great defensive front. And I know they lost one of their veteran defensive tackles. It's essentially a plug and play situation for Kinlaw, which I think is twofold. You know, there's it's a great opportunity for him. The other side of that is there's going to be great expectations for him. You know, they spent that pick on him for him to come in and play right away and plug right in. Now he's going to be alongside some really good other defensive linemen that I think will keep him from not having to deal with double teams so much. And he's going to have his role within that defensive front, and he'll be well coached. And I think it's a good situation for him. But if he can go in and take this thing by the horns, just like he did at South Carolina, then it really sets up. That's a 49ers team. I know the NFL sort of windows to win are oftentimes kind of small, but they've got just about everybody coming back except for a few spots. And Kinlaw is one of the guys coming in to fill one of those few spots. And it should be a chance, I think, for him to, you know, just step in, play, and possibly compete for a championship right off the bat. He's got his friend Debo out there, which helps going to a brand new place. There's a ton to like about the fit for Kinlaw and where he's going to be and who he's going to be out there with.
You're right. And he's not going to have to worry about going, okay, I'm going to go to a place where, you know, you're just going to sort of flounder. I mean, the 49ers, you wouldn't expect any sort of substantial drop off, right, from year one to year two. And, you know, funny thing, Wes, I actually just pulled up, I just Googled the 49ers depth chart and ESPN came up and they have Kinlaw as a starter. So if that's if that's the case, then good for him. They have him over Solomon Thomas, who was I think a former 5-star recruit and a high draft pick for the 49ers. But no, I mean, they got Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, Kentavious Street, Eric Armstead. Then you got guys like D Ford, Solomon Thomas back there. They lost, DeForest Buckner, you know, is the guy you referenced for the offseason. But a chance to walk in and play a lot immediately and contribute to a really good team. And that's really all you can ask for Kinlaw, who can then go make a name for himself and go play for a good team, have fun doing it, continue developing and get to what every NFL guy wants to get to. That's the second contract. That's what you're really trying to get to. And for him, the situation he's walking into and how talented he is, he's going to have an outstanding chance to do that and to go get a big second contract.
Yeah. So moving on to Edwards, very, very unorthodox how he ended up with the Raiders, just from a standpoint of you don't see teams spend three of their first 4 picks basically on receivers, something like that. You know, he comes in with Lynn Bowden from Kentucky. You know, they get a bunch of SEC guys, getting Ruggs from Alabama. And, you know, I think you look and you say, all right, what is this situation? And I was looking at some of the quotes out there, you know, both from Brian, which we put up the sound bites, and then from Mike Mayock, who just bragged on Brian like crazy. And I think it's a little bit different. You're not going to be necessarily in a plug and play situation where, you know, Brian's going to go in there and like be the number one receiver. But I think that's maybe good for him. He comes in, you look at them trying to put offensive weapons, I assume to try and compete with the Chiefs. They know that the Chiefs are going to be a team that for the next 5 years easily is going to be putting up points like crazy. So they overdrafted, I guess, at receiver. They know they need weapons. That's a situation where maybe Edwards comes in and can, you know, get on the field, but be on the field with some other guys who can also take away the attention of a defense. He doesn't have to be the primary guy, which he obviously was the primary guy here at South Carolina this past season. So it could be a good situation for him, assuming that offensive staff uses him and uses his talents well. But I think the thing you like about Brian, and the thing that I've noticed people talk about, the NFL guys talk about, is just like this guy has that sort of drive, that dog in him on the field, to where he's going to take the football away from you. He's going to get the extra yardage. I almost felt like Debo's running style sort of rubbed off on Brian a little bit as his career progressed. I guess knocks on Brian has been that he has been a little bit inconsistent as at times in catching the ball as far as maybe focus and concentration. But the other side of that has been that, I mean, we went back, we were talking about it on the podcast, man. The number of highlight reel catches that Brian Edwards has made in his career. I think he's almost underrated as far as his ability and how we think of him, even though it's weird to say that since he has the record at South Carolina. His ability to contort his body, to make one-handed grabs, to catch the football with people draped on him. I was glad he retweeted that catch he made. I think it was at an open scrimmage his freshman year before he had ever played a game, and they were at Williams-Brice, and he one-handed a ball in the end zone. That may be up there with the best catches he ever made in a game. So the people who are around the program tell you that this guy makes catches like that in practice, on a fairly regular basis. So yeah, I'm a little bit more hesitant about Brian just because I don't know how well run the Raiders organization always is, but everything else, looking at it, I think it could be a decent situation for him.
Yeah, I mean, Brian's one of those guys that he does a lot of things either well or extremely well. And so I think there was a concern going into the draft of it's not like Brian Edwards was super injury prone his whole career, but he did have a couple injuries, right? And then in the off season, unfortunately, while he was training for the draft, he had the foot break or the foot fracture. And there were a couple other things. So teams are a little bit concerned about the medicals, but those checked out. And so I think that helped him stay in that range. He also had a little bit of inconsistency, which is odd, catching the ball during his career at times. But I think really he really shook that off at the end of his career. They had that one year where, I mean, even it was like Debo and Bryant both, what was that, 2018, had some issues when they were better on offense even. But last year was really good in that department, from what I recall. And you're right, the highlight reel catches. So when you look at Brian, he's got good size, but he can do a little bit of everything. He's got open field ability. We've seen that. I mean, you saw him take a little tunnel screen 75 yards against Missouri. We've seen some open field ability. He returned punts for a while for Carolina. He's someone that could play special teams, I think, in the NFL. He can take the top off of defense, even though you don't think of him as an elite speed guy. He doesn't run like Henry Ruggs. Nobody does. But he can run past defenders, really good defenders at the college level. He could run past them. He can win 50-50 balls, contested balls. So he just brings a lot to the table for you. And I think, paired with some of the other weapons they got there, you're right. They spent 3 picks, Ruggs and Bowden and Brian Edwards, and then Hunter Renfro's on the roster from Clemson. So they got some good pieces there, and I think you'll be able to go in there and make a contribution, and maybe not be, maybe not a number one guy by any means, but someone that could go in there and play and catch some balls, do quite well for himself.
You mentioned you had talked to one of your NFL guys. Did you get a feel for, obviously we saw Wanham come off the board here a minute ago. Any feel or your personal opinion on the other guys and their potential to get drafted? I'm looking, is Rico Dowdle a possibility late?
Yeah.
Does Tavian Feaster have a chance to sneak in? Does somebody take a flyer on, a Donnell Stanley, a TJ Brunson, Joseph Charlton? I think, ESPN has him as the second ranked punter, I believe, in this NFL class. So, I think there's a chance when punters start coming off the board, which is normally pretty dang late, but still, what are you hearing or what do you think on those guys, man?
Well, you're right. I mean, the 2 guys that have really been pegged the most is coming into today, day 3, were Wanham, who's obviously off the board now. And then, Rico Dowdle's had some traction. And Wes, I'm not going to lie. I mean, Rico's really talented. I think there's probably a good bit of concern about the injury history, right? I mean, he stayed healthy for a more prolonged stretch last season, but still had another injury last year. He did get the combine invite, et cetera. And he has some traction, and I'm a little bit surprised there hasn't been even more, not even compared to Rico, but just more in general for Tavian Feaster. Obviously he had an injury last year. He was banged up one year at Clemson with a hamstring and was behind some guys, but he's got a lot of talent. He's got track speed. He's got size. He's a tougher runner than he gets credit for. So those are probably the ones. I mean, the guys you mentioned, TJ Brunson may have a shot, very late. I would think he'll be a priority free agent for somebody. Donnell Stanley will be a guy. Kyle Markway, I think, will be a guy who could get a tryout or a undrafted free agent look. Probably not going to be picked, but later today, later in day 3, I think you could look at Dowdle, Feaster, and Joe Charlton would probably be your main one. He may be the best, may have been the best punter in the country last year. So it depends on need, where teams are drafting, who's available, what needs do they have. It's just a unique situation with punters, but he'll have a shot for sure.
Yeah, and I think easily has been one of the best punters in the country for the last couple of years. So he'll land somewhere. And, I think, dude, you look, sometimes when you start getting to the 7th round or so, it's actually better to be an undrafted free agent because you sort of get a chance to pick among various offers. So there's a little bit of, I guess, varying opinions out there on that. But for the most part, people will tell you if you have an option to maybe pick between a few teams, sometimes that's better off than having to go wherever you're picked, but to go late. So I think that'll be interesting. All those guys will get a shot somewhere. It just depends on the situation and where they're at. Again, appreciate y'all joining us here on Facebook. I saw a couple of questions come in. One of them we just hit on was about, where do you see the other guys potentially going? And the drafts can be unpredictable, especially once you get to day 3. Who knows? And like you said, and there's so many variables that change along the way. So let's talk a bit about what was a pretty busy week at South Carolina. A staff shuffle again, the hire of Des Kitchings, that was made official on Friday. This is something, we've been tracking Des Kitchings and that whole situation since last time there was an opening. It's kind of been a little bit slow moving, but I think it's something that both parties always thought was a pretty real possibility. And obviously South Carolina chose to go defense with their previous opening. This time they have a chance to go offense, bring in Des Kitchings. It's something that really has been in the works, I would say since right after word was coming out that Brian McClendon was leaving. It was made official on Friday, and Carolina gets a guy who is a South Carolina native, has North Carolina recruiting ties. I think has coveted this job for a while, and I think should be an outstanding fit for Carolina. Just sometimes a hire just makes sense. I think the Rod Wilson hire, getting him to coach linebackers, last opening just made complete sense. And I think this hire as well. You want people that want to be here and that the state is special to them, and that, he's not a USC grad, but he is a South Carolina native, and his parents are still in South Carolina, and he's recruited this area as well as North Carolina. I think just top to bottom, Des Kitchings is, I would say, a home run hire for South Carolina, Chris.
Yeah, I think they did. You do as well as could be expected. With a hire like that, and someone that has those natural ties, whether it's to the state, whether it's recruiting, who has a nice pedigree. Certainly don't get the sense that they're just reaching on a coach, for example. I mean, this is a guy that's still young and has a lot going for him, and has done it at a school like NC State, recruiting in the Carolinas, and NC State being a school that really has a similar sort of profile as South Carolina in terms of maybe, somewhat of the recruiting base and somewhat of the history, things like that. So there's a lot to like about Des Kitchings. Adding Rod Wilson in the offseason, I agree with you, a guy with a, Super Bowl pedigree, played linebacker, coached linebackers, has experience in the NFL and special teams for what's really good special teams unit. So Des Kitchings, when you losing Thomas Brown was a significant loss because he was, former SEC running back. He was a super recruiter. But adding Des Kitchings after Thomas Brown leaves, I think you do really well for yourself in terms of just getting somebody who can keep the continuity and keep things going there.
Yeah, and we'll see what the effects are on recruiting moving forward. That's honestly more of a thing, especially with coaches not being able to go on the road. It pays off immediately, but the impact is really more of a long-term impact, I think. And having relationships in the state of North Carolina. For those who are subscribers, you may have already seen it, but we went through and broke down almost all of his recruiting classes at NC State, where both from a recruiting coordinator standpoint, which he was for a good portion of his 8 years there, plus the fact that he pretty consistently was one of their best recruiters, if not their best, most productive recruiter. Took care of his room, which is a big part of this at South Carolina, which what that means is, are you signing, if you're the running backs coach, are you making sure that the running back room is talented? If you're the receivers coach, are you making sure the receivers room is talented? You look at what he did there, several 4-star guys, some 3-star guys that panned out, and some guys at South Carolina. I thought it was interesting looking back. I remember I actually went and interviewed Naheem Hines when he was in high school, absolute speedster that I think South Carolina offered, but maybe never really pushed that hard for. But then, you look at Savion Jackson a couple of years ago. This is a kid that was a big time major target for South Carolina and for NC State, obviously. And the Gamecocks had him basically all but committed, after his official visit to Columbia. And I think was probably a silent commit at the time. And then NC State gets him in, I guess, one more time and is able to switch him back, and he commits to NC State. Des Kitchings was the primary recruiter for him then as well. So I'll be curious to see the impact of this short-term and long-term. I think short-term, you look at Travion Cooley, that's a guy to keep an eye on. He's a North Carolina running back. Carolina was already in good shape with. But, you look, Kitchings was involved with him at NC State, offered him at NC State, was one of the early offers for him. Tyon Evans at Hartsville, who's now at junior college. Those are the two names I think we're already focused on at running back, and I think that probably continues under Des Kitchings. So we'll see, man. It's a different world right now. Obviously, all the recruiting is over the phone and over Zoom and FaceTime and all this. So it's very different, but I think you already saw some of the excitement. The second he was official, he started tweeting and some pretty direct tweets that I think were signaled towards some of the running back targets in this class yesterday. So I think it's someone that's excited to be at South Carolina, and I think the fan base, the people that already have followed him are excited, but I think it's somebody the fan base will quickly realize is like a go-getter in recruiting.
Yeah, he's someone that, he's got connections. He's still a younger guy, even though he's got 16 years of experience at the college level. And he's proven that he can do it. I think that's one honest question that you always have to have is, a guy who maybe goes and recruits at a school with a logo or a huge pedigree, say a guy goes and recruits at Alabama, you never detract a guy, you never down a guy or take away from what he's done because he recruited really well at Alabama, but you do have to wonder, okay, is it going to translate? If a guy moves from Alabama to South Carolina or, Alabama to Maryland or NC State, wherever it may be, a school that doesn't quite have that pedigree, you wonder, does it translate? And so we've seen cases of yes, and we've seen cases of no. And with Des, he's already proven that he can develop backs, find some guys at Vanderbilt, at NC State. He recruited a lot of talent to that running back room. And so there's no reason to think he can't do similar work at South Carolina. And that'll be a very good thing. And South Carolina already has some young talent in that room too. When you look at Marshawn Lloyd, Shad Amos, some of the guys on the roster.
Definitely. All right. Let's see if we got any questions. I'm going to go through y'all's comments now. Let's see. Yeah, I agree. Des is a good hire. Michael Beckham, what's up, man? He says hello. Let's see. I think we had a couple of questions. Derek Phillips, Chris says that at least I cleaned up and for you to get a haircut, which, by the way, I've heard the wife has been cutting your hair at home.
Yes. I typically look, the fact that I typically try to cut off the top of my hair on the Zoom call has nothing to do with my wife's hair cutting ability. It's really just I haven't brushed it or anything at all today, which is not atypical of even a normal day. But I haven't, and haven't showered, haven't done any of that. Been working in the garage some today while in between doing some actual work. So, but she's done pretty well. And I understand yours as well. You've been getting the home haircut.
Oh yeah. This is the the second home haircut.
Oh, number 2. Okay.
Yeah, we went high and tight a little bit, but it's cool. All right, actual question, Roderick Nelson. What
Yep.
area will Rod Wilson be recruiting? I know off the top of my head that he will have a low country area. And some of this stuff I imagine will shift again with Des coming in. And, I think he's going to clearly have a big North Carolina area. Bobby Bentley has had a big North Carolina area. Kyle Krantz has had a big, and then Joe Cox is getting part of Charlotte now that he's on staff. So, we'll see how everything gets shifted around. I know, like I said, there's a low country area in South Carolina that Rod Wilson will have. Do you have it in front of you or know off the top of your head the other areas we've seen him
Yeah,
involved?
I know that and this was shortly after he came on. He had an area in Georgia, like in the southeast part, and then also Raleigh in North Carolina. Yeah. Plus that low country area that you mentioned. And now it could have been shifted. I did hear recently that some of the other territories were shifted around a bit. You know, there was, an additional territory expansion in North Carolina, for example. So we do know low country for sure because they actually made that public recently. But low country, some of Georgia, probably some of North Carolina for Rod Wilson.
And I'm sure, dude, Des Kitchings is going to have Raleigh. I'm sure.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
At least part of Raleigh. I would assume
Right.
all of Raleigh.
Yeah,
I
I
think
would think so.
you probably keep Joe Cox in Charlotte, just
Mhm.
being from there. But any areas in North Carolina where Des Kitchings has had success, I think you're going to keep him there. Interesting question here. Let's see, from James Martin. I know he's a Gamecock Central subscriber, sort of along the lines of what we're talking about. But with these guys recruiting North Carolina, will that combat what Mac Brown is doing currently? I say yes and no. I mean, I'm not going to feed you, some BS that South Carolina is going to instantly start just beating Mac Brown and those guys for people they want. Because I think, Chris, you got to give Mac Brown all the credit in the world for the job they've done in North Carolina. Somebody, a high school coach who is friends with Mac Brown told me when they made that hire. Sometimes people tell you stuff, Chris, and you just sort of shrug them off. I shrugged this guy off. He's like, Mac Brown will close the doors to North Carolina again. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. Well, to his staff's credit, they've done an outstanding job in the state of North Carolina. That doesn't mean the Gamecocks can't get people here and there. They've done that. They already have Nick Barrett committed. They already have Bryce Still committed, who is at school in Virginia, but is by all intents and purposes a North Carolina kid. He's from Raleigh. So, they're still going to be able to recruit that area, I think, Chris, but this will help. But Mac Brown right now, he has the all important recruiting momentum going, and they had a surprise season last year. They had a young quarterback. They've dialed in, like, for whatever reason, it's sort of cool again in North Carolina to go to North Carolina. And they've been selling that to this. It kind of, honestly, Chris, it reminds me of looking back some of those Steve Spurrier classes when all the in-state guys were sort of keen to the idea of teaming up and playing for their home state, and they all got to know each other really well. And I think North Carolina is doing that right now. So I give them credit. I think these hires, Cox and Des Kitchings, will help South Carolina land some guys in the state just because of prior relationships with high school coaches. But if North Carolina sort of locks in on a guy in state, it's probably going to be fairly hard to land a bunch of those guys.
Yeah, and I think the key to North Carolina with their success, obviously, they had that stunner at the beginning of the season last year over South Carolina, which definitely helped in terms of their selling points on the recruiting trail with some head-to-heads. There's going to be head-to-heads between those schools. And also, they did have a surprise season that it wasn't thought that I did not think they were going to be very good, and a bunch of other people didn't either. And they turned out to have a pretty good season last year, and they built some early recruiting momentum that they've been able to sustain, and that was key. We all said when Mac Brown was hired that they needed to do it pretty quickly. They couldn't afford to go have really, two very poor seasons, for example, in years 1 and 2 back to back with a coach of his age, because that could sort of already start spelling disaster for you in recruiting, and then it just gets worse and spirals from there. But They had the good year. They captured some momentum. They were able to do that, and that was a positive for them. And so that there is a little bit. I think some people look at it and think that North Carolina is just absolutely murdering South Carolina on the trail based on some guys that maybe had early South Carolina offers. Look, North Carolina's won some head-to-heads. They won the game last year, and they've won some head-to-heads this year. You look like a guy like Ra Dilworth, for example, but some of the guys that they've got committed, were not head-to-head wins over just South Carolina. But there's no doubt you got to give them a lot of credit. They've done a really good job, and they're going to be a thorn. And it's South Carolina is going to have to win some of those, and maybe Kitchings, Cox, and just a better season for South Carolina could certainly help.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, they're facing a lot of obstacles right now. Let's be honest. Coming off the rough year, the uncertainty around everything else in sports as well. There's a lot of obstacles right now that they are up against. Frankly, all right, a couple more questions, and we're going to hop off here. But we had a question about who's going to take over. I believe the question is asking about BMAC's area in the Columbia metro area. And for the most part, they've split the Midlands up among a lot of guys. I think Bobo has an area in the Midlands now. I know Mike Peterson has an area in the Midlands. T-Rob has an area in the Midlands. Do other guys have some areas in the Midlands as well? I know those three guys do. And then as far as BMAC's Georgia area, I don't know exactly who will take over, but a lot, pretty much the entire staff has Georgia areas already as well. So they'll split it up the way they really treat all of South Carolina, obviously as in-state. Then they treat Atlanta as in-state. So you have a lot of coaches split among that area, and they treat, Greater Charlotte area as an in-state territory where you have several guys recruiting there as well.
Yeah, and really, Will Muschamp talks a lot about that 5-hour radius. You're talking about South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and then you spot recruit other areas, whether it's down in Miami, whether it's down in the DMV, in Alabama, Tennessee. They're going to spot recruit those spots. So, yeah, the ones that you mentioned, Wes, are definitely, T-Rob's had a part of Columbia, or the Midlands, rather, for quite a while, like Spring Valley, for example. I think Blythewood is another one. He has that sort of area. Bobo's been recruiting there, and Peterson. I think those are the main ones off the top of my head. And then the rest of the coaches, they have territories split, whether it's some of them have South Carolina, North Carolina, some of them go down in Florida, etc.
All right, we have another NFL draft question. James, we kind of hit on this earlier, but we'll hit it again real quick. Chris, Tavian Feaster and Rico Daddle. What are your chances on those two guys getting drafted? It seems like Rico has more of the draft buzz right now. Does somebody take a flyer on Tavian, or is he more of an undrafted free agent? I guess we'll find out. But I tend to think Rico is at least going to get drafted somewhere, even if it's, maybe even 7th round.
Yeah, it does seem that way, Wes. And, I think the concern with Rico is not the talent, in terms of draftable talent or being able to even stick on an NFL roster. The question's just been, does a team think enough of him in terms of his ability to stay healthy to invest a draft pick in him? And so maybe that is the case with the late round selection, but I do think it would be late for that reason. If not, then he's going to find himself probably in a pretty favorable undrafted free agent opportunity where that he can then go try to stay healthy, try to make a squad, go make some noise, and then try to, again, catch on for good for quite a while with the team. So he's got a chance. Feaster, again, I hit on this a little earlier. I'm surprised Feaster hasn't gotten a little bit more love. It's true he didn't have gigantic production in college, and there are a few reasons for that. One is that he was at Clemson for a while. He's behind some guys. He got hurt last season at South Carolina after starting the season really strong. But he's got track speed. He's a bigger guy. He's got talent. So I think he's going to have a chance to go play for a team. I don't know if it'll be with the draft pick at this point, but I think he's going to have an opportunity at some point.
I mean, did you not feel like – it took him a second to get settled down a little bit because – and he's talked about this, the fact that – and I think Muschamp's talked about this too. He basically had to get finished up at Clemson and then is dropped right in the first couple of practices at South Carolina. You're trying to get ready for the season, trying to learn the playbook. that's a lot on you. So he finally gets settled in. I thought he got comfortable, and I thought we were starting to really see what this guy could do, like the middle portion of the season. And then he gets hurt. And, in the Carolina offensive line, for whatever reason, there was a section in the middle of the year where they were opening up holes, and Rico and Tavian were really doing a good job of taking advantage of them. And then all of a sudden, the offensive line play faltered as well. And it sort of all fell apart as far as the running game. But I mean, I was watching Tavian as he got settled in, and I was like, man, this guy's going to play his way into, I don't know, like a top 5 rounds potentially. And running backs aren't valued like some of the other positions are, but I would have said it was a no-brainer he was getting drafted. But if you look him up, a lot of the NFL draft sites or whatever, or at least one of the ones I looked at, he didn't even pop up on their guys that they had bios of on NFL.com. So I thought he should have got a combine, invite and a chance to go run with the electronic stuff on him and see what he runs and see what he measures in at, and let people talk to him and see what his personality is all about. Because I think he is a very driven dude, a very mature kid. And I think it was very unfortunate for him, much like with Brian Edwards, that we didn't get to have any pro days this year because teams didn't get to go around and get a better feel for some of these kids. So I'm hoping he gets a chance, because to me, he's got potential NFL talent.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, you look at what Feaster did against Florida. He had 175 yards in that game. Carried the ball 25 times, had 175 yards and a touchdown. And so he had production in his career. He had Kentucky had 107 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tennessee put up 80 yards, and then he had the injury later in the year that sort of limited him, and didn't have at times didn't have Rico Dowdle for that 1-2 punch either to help him out. So I think both of those guys just had some things that held them back at times, and struggled a little bit with injuries, and Rico Dowdle during his whole career struggled with it. But both of them coming into this season, I thought had a chance, if they stayed healthy, work their way into later. I still don't think you would have looked at either of them and said, okay, this guy's going to be a 3rd round pick or anything, but you thought they both had a chance to go later. I was very surprised at Feaster not getting invited to the combine. I was sort of surprised by TJ Brunson not getting invited. And those are probably the main 2, surprises I had during the process.
Yeah, and I keep forgetting to bring up TJ. Hopefully he gets a chance, man, because the kid is a tackling machine. We got, I think, one more question. We're going to hit that, but want to thank everybody for joining us before I hit this question. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber, we have a lot of deals going on. I pinned the link to the top of this video. You should be able to see it. But we've got, I think this deal, I was looking today, I think it only goes until the end of the month, and that may change. But right now it's only going until May 1st, I think. But we've got a promotional code right now. If you put in Gamecocks 2020, so Gamecocks 2020, we will give you access free until August 1st. So, essentially it is a free trial, but it is extended out way past what our normal free trials are. And once the trial ends, you'll be charged like normal. Or if you want to go ahead and pay, you can actually use the code Gamecocks on an annual subscription, which is normally $99.95. And that will give you 50% off to $49.95. It'll go ahead and hit your card now, but again, you'll be saving $50 on the life of that subscription, which is already saving, I guess, $20 from what you'd pay in a year if you were going to pay monthly. So hope everybody listening enjoys the videos, and if you do, check out some of our content, some of our paywall content on Gamecock Central. But we also have a lot of free stuff on there as well. Got a question from Savannah. Who asked, are we surprised that Charlton hasn't been picked up yet, or those guys normally get signed as a free agent? I don't know the numbers on how many punters get drafted in a given year, but it's normally not many, and they're normally pretty late. And like Chris said earlier, you're not going to draft a punter unless you have a need for a punter to come in and basically take that position. So if you have an opening at punter, you may spend a late pick on a guy if he's an absolute stud, which I think, Joseph is. Like, he's in that list of probably 2 or 3 guys that are draftable at that position. So I think he'll get drafted. I think there's a decent chance he gets drafted, but it will probably be late. But the thing is, if you can consistently punt the football, and they spend a draft pick on you, they're going to want to keep you around. So it's kind of a situation where, you maybe spend 10 years in the league because you're not getting the wear and tear of other guys. So it's a pretty good situation, I think. Real quick, final thoughts, Chris. We had expected this, we anticipated it and reported it, but it became official. The shift of Bobby Bentley back to tight ends and the shift of Joe Cox to wide receivers. I was looking back, the guys they're focused on at tight end and recruiting are actually all, I won't say all, but some of the top guys, the names that we write about, are all guys that were offered initially by Bobby Bentley when he was a tight ends coach anyway. So I don't really think there's a huge effect there recruiting wise. Joe Cox, there'll be an adjustment. Joe Cox did, coach receivers at Colorado State his final year there. So he's been in that position before. There is, let's be honest, there's a little bit more responsibility on you with the wide receiver room, I think, than there is with the tight end room. And he needs to go out and sign a good class because Carolina needs to restock that position, I think, moving forward. So a little bit more pressure, a little bit more responsibility, but I think Joe Cox is a funny guy that relates well to kids, and I think he'll get after it. I think he'll bust his tail on the recruiting trail, and I'm curious to see what he can do with the receiver room.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because both of these guys are just basically they're just going to go back and coach the position they both coached last season. With Joe Cox, the main difference is just doing it with a different room at a different school. But he knows what Bobo wants in the receivers. He's coached there. He knows that scheme. He's G8 in it, and he's position coached in Bobo's scheme for a while. He played for Bobo as a quarterback at Georgia, so there's a lot of familiarity there. And then, you look at Bobby Bentley, he was instrumental in bringing in Nick Muse, who he'll have as a senior this year. He recruited Jaheim Bell and Eric Shaw, a couple incoming guys who'll be added to that tight end room. So there's going to be a lot of familiarity and carryover there for both those guys. So that, it made sense from that standpoint. A lot of people said, well, what do you think? Before Kitchings was hired, will Muschamp hire a receivers coach and shift somebody over to running backs, et cetera? But when Des Kitchings, when there was another staff opening, it made sense to bring him in. You'd already interviewed him. He coached running backs for most of his 16 years. And then you could just move other guys back to positions that they've already coached. So made a lot of sense from that standpoint. And I think it should be a pretty smooth transition for those guys. I think you're right, Wes, with Cox. It really, the biggest thing there is just, can he go make some noise on the recruiting trail? Can he go land some talented receivers and continue adding to that room? And same thing at tight end, running back, everywhere, because Carolina needs some more playmakers.
Definitely. All right, y'all. We appreciate it. We appreciate the time. Everybody enjoy your Saturday. He is Chris Clark. I'm Wes Mitchell. And again, check us out on Gamecock Central. We do have plenty of free content as well. But as long as people are tuning in, which it looks like they have been, the numbers look pretty good. As long as people are tuning in, we'll continue to hop on Facebook and YouTube, maybe even do a little Instagram live or something at some point. So appreciate all of you taking the time out today. For Chris, I'm Wes, and we will see you all soon.